The storm had not come gently. It arrived like a monster in the night, clawing at windows, screaming through broken shutters, and rattling the earth with every crash of thunder. Clara had braced herself for it, clutching a lantern and praying the roof of the old caretaker's cottage would hold. By morning, the skies were gray and swollen with the weight of their fury, and the world beyond her door was no longer recognizable. Where there had once been winding country roads lined with trees, there were now piles of twisted branches, thick mud, and jagged stretches of uprooted earth. Fences had been ripped out like weeds. Telephone lines sagged uselessly, dangling into puddles that reflected the bleak morning light. The little town, already small and tucked away, was cut off entirely. Clara had thought she would find someone, anyone, that first morning. She had trudged through the debris, calling out, listening for an answer. The only reply had been the distant groan of settling wood and the occasional flap of a loose, metal roof panel banging against a house. She had never realized how loud silence could be until then. By midday, she returned to the caretaker's cottage, soaked, tired, and empty-handed. Alone, the first day wasn't unbearable. She told herself the isolation wouldn't last. Someone would come. The roads would be cleared. Power would flicker back on. She lit a few candles, inventoried the food. She had a bag of rice, 2 cans of beans, some crackers, and a tin of peaches, and settled in as though she were simply waiting out a long weekend. But night fell quickly, and with it came the kind of darkness that made her chest tighten. The lantern hissed softly, casting long shadows that shifted when she moved. Every sound made her flinch: the rustle of leaves outside, the creak of the roof, the faint drip of water somewhere in the walls. The house felt alive, breathing, watching. The second day was harder. Clara woke with a dry mouth and a gnawing pit in her stomach. She rationed her food carefully, forcing herself to eat slowly, to pretend that a cracker and a spoonful of rice could fill her. The air smelled faintly of mildew, damp clothes, and the smoke of her half-burned candle. She tried to distract herself by tidying the cottage, sweeping leaves that had blown in under the warped door. But every task ended too quickly, leaving her with the weight of stillness pressing in again. It was the stillness that unnerved her. She had lived in cities before, where sound was constant traffic, chatter, sirens, footsteps. Even when she'd moved to the countryside, there had been the reassurance of neighbors, of farm dogs barking, of children's laughter carrying through open fields. Now there was nothing. Just silence, so heavy it seemed to echo against the walls of her mind. By the third day, Clara's hope had begun to thin. She had tried walking farther, hoping to reach the center of town, but the roads were blocked in every direction. Fallen trees sprawled like barriers, their tangled roots jutting upward like warning signs. When she climbed one such barricade, she saw only more destruction stretching to the horizon. No smoke from chimneys. No figures moving in the distance. Just emptiness. When she returned to the cottage, sweat sticking her shirt to her back, her legs trembling from exhaustion, Clara finally allowed the fear to settle. What if no one came? What if the town was abandoned? What if she had truly been left behind? That night, she sat by the window, staring into the gray dusk, and felt something she hadn't in years: utter, consuming loneliness. It wasn't the kind that comes from being without company for a few hours. This was the kind that pressed deep into her chest, reminding her of all she had lost: the parents she no longer spoke to, the friends scattered to other places, the child she had once cradled and buried too soon. 3 days. Only 3 days, and it felt like she had been exiled from the world for years. The cottage seemed smaller now, its walls leaning closer, as though it too wanted to swallow her. She wrapped a blanket tight around her shoulders and whispered aloud just to hear a voice, even if it was her own. And though she couldn't know it yet, though she couldn't imagine what tomorrow would bring, she was only one heartbeat away from the moment that would change everything. The moment when a small pair of feet would run toward her, and a trembling little voice would whisper words that would break her loneliness. Forever. The fourth morning dawned no brighter than the ones before it. A dull, gray haze hung over the land, muting even the faint colors of the fields. Clara rose stiffly from her cot, her body aching from the uneven mattress, her mind aching from the sameness of everything. She moved through the motions of survival, boiling a little rice, sipping the last of the clean water she had collected from a rain barrel, but her hands felt heavy, her movements mechanical. It wasn't hunger that troubled her most, though the dull ache in her belly was a constant reminder of scarcity. It was the silence. The air itself seemed to press down on her, too still, too expectant, as if it were waiting for her to speak. And sometimes she did, whispering a word here, a sigh there, just to hear proof that her own voice had not deserted her. But even her voice startled her now. It was too loud, too foreign in the empty cottage. When she stopped, the silence rushed back in, thicker than before. Loneliness wasn't new to Clara. She had known it for years, carried it like an old scar hidden beneath her clothes. But this was different. This was raw. This was not simply the absence of company, but the suffocating awareness of it. There was no one to hear her laugh, no one to ask her what she was thinking, no one to notice when she cried herself to sleep. By midday, she tried to keep busy. She washed her clothes in a dented metal basin and strung them across the fireplace to dry. She sorted through the debris she had collected, bits of wood she might use as kindling, jars she might clean and repurpose. But every task ended too soon, and the hours stretched endlessly, thin and brittle like glass about to shatter. Sometimes, in that silence, she thought she heard things. A door closing, though no one was there. A child's laugh carried on the wind, though the road outside was empty. Once she swore she heard the soft trill of a piano, so faint she strained her ears until they rang, but when she opened the cottage door, there was only the rustle of dying leaves. Her mind was playing tricks, she told herself. That was what silence did. It hollowed out the edges of thought, warped reality, made her own memories crawl back into the present. Memories. Those were harder to ignore than the hunger. In the quiet, Clara thought of her family. She thought of her mother's voice, sharp but steady, the kind of voice that cut through confusion. She thought of her father's laugh, rumbling, so rare and so precious that she had memorized the sound of it. She thought of her younger self, seated at the piano, stumbling over the same melody again and again until her mother scolded her for the noise. But most of all, she thought of the baby she had once held. It had been years ago, yet the memory was so vivid that it felt fresh. Tiny fingers curling around her own, eyes blinking up at her with bewildered innocence. Clara had been so young then, unprepared and unsteady, but she had loved with a fierceness that burned her alive. And then, just as quickly, that love had been taken away. A fever, the doctor said. A sickness that came too swiftly for them to fight. That was the day silence had first claimed her. It had never truly let go. Now, sitting alone in the cottage with the world outside drowned in ruin, Clara felt that silence pressing deeper, as though it wanted to remind her of all she no longer had. It whispered in its wordless way, "You are forgotten. You are unwanted. You are utterly, entirely alone." She pressed her palms against her ears, trying to block it out, but the silence was inside her now. It clung to her like a second skin. That night, she didn't light a candle. She let the darkness swallow her whole, curling on the cot with the blanket pulled to her chin. She tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she counted her own breaths until she lost track, until her eyelids drooped. But before she drifted off, a strange thought came to her, uninvited. What if silence is only waiting? What if something is coming to fill it? The thought lingered, like a fragile flame, as she fell asleep, unaware that by the next day she would learn just how true it was. The morning of the 5th day broke with a pale light seeping through the cracks of the shutters. Clara stirred, groggy from shallow sleep, her body stiff from the cold that had crept into the cottage overnight. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes, and for a moment she forgot where she was. She half expected to hear traffic in the distance, a neighbor's voice, the hum of life outside her door. But when she opened her ears to the world, there it was again nothing. She rose with a sigh, pulling her blanket tight around her shoulders, and went to the small window. The field stretched endlessly under a bruised sky, empty of movement, empty of promise. She pressed her hand against the glass as if she could push the silence away, but it clung stubbornly, an invisible fog. Clara busied herself with her routine. She measured out a small handful of rice, boiled it with the last of her rainwater, and ate it slowly. She forced herself to chew carefully, to stretch the meal into something resembling satisfaction. Then she cleaned the pot, folded her blanket, and stepped outside to check the road again. The air was still damp, heavy with the scent of wet earth and rotting leaves. Clara picked her way through the mess of broken branches and mud, her boots sinking into the ground with each step. She didn't expect to see anything new, yet she went anyway, because doing nothing was worse. And then, for the first time in days, she heard something. It was faint at first, almost too soft to notice. A sound carried on the wind, irregular, uncertain. Clara froze, her heart quickening. She held her breath and tilted her head, straining to listen. There it was again. Not the groan of shifting wood. Not the rattle of a loose shutter. Something different. Something alive. Footsteps. Small ones. Clara's throat tightened. She turned slowly, her eyes sweeping across the broken landscape. Nothing. Only the sway of long grass and the skeletal outline of trees. But she had heard it, she was sure. She stood still for a long moment, waiting. Then came another sound, sharper this time. A sob. It cut through the silence so suddenly that Clara's chest ached. A child's sob, thin and trembling, carried on the damp air. She spun toward the noise, her pulse hammering. "Hello?" she called, her voice unsteady from disuse. No answer. She stepped forward, her boots crunching against gravel. "Is someone there?" The sobbing stopped, replaced by the quick patter of feet. Clara's breath caught. They were running closer now, coming fast. She took a step back, bracing herself, fear and hope tangling inside her like vines. And then, out from behind a toppled fence, a figure burst into view. A little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6. Her hair was tangled, matted with mud and twigs. Her dress, once white, was torn and stained, clinging to her small frame. Bare feet slapped against the wet ground as she ran straight for Clara, her eyes wide with terror. Clara instinctively crouched, arms half extended, unsure what to do. Before she could even speak, the girl collided with her, clutching at her skirt with tiny, desperate hands. Her small body trembled like a bird caught in a storm. Clara's mouth went dry. Hey. It's okay," she whispered, though her own heart was pounding. "You're safe. I've got you." The girl tilted her head up, eyes glassy with tears, lips trembling. And then, in the smallest, most broken voice Clara had ever heard, the child whispered, "Be my mama." The words struck Clara like lightning, searing through her chest. For a heartbeat, she couldn't breathe. The sound of them was too raw, too impossible. Yet the girl clung tighter, burying her face in Clara's side, repeating it again, softer this time, as if afraid the silence might swallow it whole. "Be my mama." Clara's arms, trembling, closed around the child before she could think. She held her close, her mind reeling, her heart breaking open in a way she hadn't thought possible. And for the first time in days, for the first time in years, the silence around her no longer felt empty. It felt full. Clara knelt there in the mud, her skirt soaked where the child clung to her. For a moment she could not move, could not think. only feel the wild thrum of her heart as the little girl's words echoed inside her. Be my mama. The plea was so small, so fragile, yet it carried the weight of an entire world. Clara had heard many cries in her life, angry, grieving, desperate, but never anything like this. This was not just a request. It was a surrender. It was a child's soul reaching out blindly, praying someone would hold on. Clara's arms wrapped around her instinctively, as though her body knew what to do before her mind caught up. The girl fit against her perfectly, her head resting just beneath Clara's chin, her thin shoulders trembling beneath Clara's touch. She smelled of damp earth and smoke, as though she had wandered through both fire and flood. "Hush, it's all right," Clara murmured, though her own voice wavered. She smoothed the girl's tangled hair with shaking fingers. "You're safe now. I've got you." The girl did not answer, only pressed closer, clutching Clara's dress with the desperate grip of someone who feared letting go would mean vanishing. Clara felt the tiny fingers dig into the fabric, anchoring themselves to her as though she were the last solid thing in a broken world. Minutes passed like that, the silence no longer oppressive but tender, filled with the rhythm of two uneven breaths slowly finding a fragile harmony. Finally, Clara pulled back just enough to look at the child's face. Her cheeks were streaked with dirt, her lips cracked from thirst. Yet it was her eyes that made Clara's breath catch. Wide, dark eyes, shimmering with tears, full of both fear and something far worse, loneliness. Clara recognized it instantly, like looking into a mirror of her own soul. "What's your name, sweetheart?" she asked softly. The girl sniffled, her voice barely audible. "Lily, Lily," Clara repeated, tasting the name like a promise. She brushed a smear of mud from the girl's cheek with her thumb. "That's a beautiful name." The girl blinked up at her, eyes searching, as if trying to decide whether this strange woman could truly be trusted. Then, almost inaudibly, she whispered again, "Be my mama." The words struck Clara harder the second time. They slid past the walls she had built around her heart, past the scars she had learned to live with, and settled deep in the part of her she thought had died long ago. She remembered the weight of her own baby in her arms, the way she had whispered promises to protect him, promises she hadn't been able to keep. 1,000 reasons rose up in her mind to push back. "I can't. I'm not ready. I'll fail you. I'll lose you too." But when she looked at Lily, this fragile, frightened child who had stumbled through the storm and found her, Clara couldn't force the words out. Instead, she cupped the girl's face gently in her hands. "I don't know if I can be a mama," she admitted, her voice breaking. "But I can keep you safe. I can take care of you. I promise." For the first time, Lily's lips curled into the faintest shadow of a smile, brief and trembling, but real. She leaned into Clara's touch as though she had been, waiting her whole life for it. Clara felt something stir inside her then, a quiet strength, unfamiliar but steady. She rose to her feet, lifting Lily into her arms with surprising ease. The child wrapped her legs around Clara's waist, her head resting on her shoulder as if she had always belonged there. The weight was light, almost too light for a child her age, but to Clara it felt heavier than anything she had ever carried. Not a burden, but a responsibility. A reason. As Clara stepped back toward the cottage, Lily's small fingers remained knotted in the fabric of her dress, refusing to let go. And Clara, for the first time in days, didn't feel the urge to break the silence. She didn't need to. The girl's heartbeat against her chest spoke louder than words. Inside, she laid Lily gently on the cot, tucking the blanket around her thin frame. The child's eyelids drooped with exhaustion, but before sleep claimed her, she reached out blindly, her small hand finding Clara's. "Don't leave me," Lily whispered. Clara squeezed her hand, her throat too tight for speech. She sat by the cot until the girl's breathing deepened, until she knew Lily had slipped into dreams. And even then, Clara did not let go. The silence that night was different. Not empty, not cruel, but filled with the soft rhythm of a child sleeping and the fragile hope of a woman who, against all odds, had been chosen. When Clara woke the next morning, the first thing she noticed was the warmth. For days she had risen to the cold emptiness of the cottage, but now there was a small body curled beside her on the cot, a faint breath brushing against her arm. For a few blissful seconds, she simply lay still, listening. The rhythm of another heartbeat filled the silence she had dreaded for so long. Lily stirred, blinking grudgingly. Her small fingers tightened around Clara's sleeve, as though afraid the night might have erased what she'd found. Clara gave a reassuring squeeze, her lips quirking into the faintest smile. "Morning, sweetheart." The girl only nodded, still half asleep, her tangled hair falling into her eyes. Clara brushed it back gently. She had forgotten how natural the gesture felt, how instinctive. Over breakfast, 2 crackers and the last of the peaches, Clara began to ask questions. She didn't want to push too hard, but she needed to know how this child had ended up alone in a world that had gone so suddenly quiet. "Do you know where your mama and papa are, Lily?" she asked softly, spooning the syrup from the tin into Lily's eager mouth. The girl's face tightened. She shook her head, chewing slowly. "Papa, he ran with me when the water came. Mama stayed behind." Clara's chest ached. She remembered the storm, how sudden and violent it had been. A surge of water, maybe a river overflow, sweeping through the town. She tried to picture a man carrying this fragile child through the chaos, only to lose her in the aftermath. "Do you remember what happened after?" Clara asked gently. Lily swallowed hard, her little hands fidgeting in her lap. "Papa told me to hold on to the fence. He said he'd come back, but the water took him. I called and called." Her voice cracked. "He didn't come back." Tears welled in Lily's eyes, and Clara reached across the table, cupping her small hands in her own. "I'm so sorry, Lily." The girl wiped at her face with the back of her arm, stubborn in her grief. "I waited, but nobody came. Then I walked. I walked for a long time. I thought maybe I'd find Mama, but it was just houses with no people. Broken things. No voices." Her words painted a picture Clara could see too vividly. A little girl wandering through wreckage, calling for someone who never answered, listening to her own footsteps echo in the emptiness. The thought twisted something deep inside Clara, because hadn't she been doing the same in her own way for years? "And then you found me," Clara said softly. Lily nodded, her eyes fixed on her lap. Then she lifted her chin as if summoning courage. "I asked you because I needed one. A mama. Not just anyone." The words caught Clara off guard. Her breath stalled, her heart thudded painfully. She had thought the plea was born only of fear, of desperation. But looking at Lily now, she realized it was more than that. The child had chosen her. Clara opened her mouth, then closed it again. She wanted to tell Lily she wasn't strong enough, that she didn't deserve to be anyone's mother, that she had already failed once in the most devastating way. But the words stuck, heavy and bitter, unspoken. Instead, she asked, "Why me?" Lily's answer was so simple it unraveled Clara completely. "Because you looked like you were waiting for me." The room blurred as tears filled Clara's eyes. She turned her face slightly, ashamed to let the child see her break. But Lily reached out, her small hand resting on Clara's arm, steady and sure. It was such a tender, unthinking gesture that it felt like a mirror held up to Clara's own aching heart. She swallowed hard, her voice trembling when she finally spoke. "Maybe I was." For the rest of the day, Clara let the questions rest. They spent the hours together in the cottage tidying, sharing what little food they had, even humming a tune as Lily clumsily traced shapes in the dust with her finger. Clara found herself watching the girl constantly, noting the way she tilted her head when curious, the way she whispered to herself when she thought no one was listening. Each detail carved a place for Lily in Clara's memory in her life that night. As Lily drifted off with her small hand once again curled around Clara's, Clara lay awake staring at the ceiling. She thought of the promise she had whispered to her own baby years ago and how fragile it had been. Now another child had placed her trust in her, unasked but freely given. And though fear clawed at her fear of losing again, of failing again, there was something stronger stirring beneath it. A quiet, steady resolve. Perhaps this storm hadn't left her with nothing. Perhaps, against all odds, it had brought her something she didn't even know she was waiting for. The days that followed carried a different rhythm. Clara no longer woke to the hollow silence pressing down on her chest. Instead, she woke to the soft shifting of a small body beside her, to the quiet murmur of Lily's voice as she talked to herself in half-dreams, to the tug of a tiny hand searching for hers in the dark. It changed everything. Where before her days had been shapeless, defined only by survival, now they had a purpose. She rose not only to eat but to make sure Lily ate first. She measured out food carefully, dividing portions with a discipline she had never bothered with when she was alone. She washed Lily's scratched knees with water from the barrel, wrapping them gently in cloth torn from her own shirt. She combed the girl's hair with her fingers, untangling knots until it fell in soft waves across her shoulders. Lily's presence forced Clara into action. She had no room for drifting thoughts, no time to crumble beneath loneliness. A child needed her. And to her surprise, the need did not weigh her down, it steadied her. One afternoon, while they sat on the steps of the cottage, Lily pointed to the horizon where the clouds were thinning. "Do you think they'll come for us?" she asked, her voice cautious, as if hope itself were dangerous. Clara hesitated. The truth was, she didn't know. The roads were still blocked. The town felt abandoned. But she couldn't let despair seep into Lily's heart. "Yes," she said firmly. "Someone will come. And until then, we'll be ready." The girl studied her for a moment, then nodded as if satisfied. She leaned against Clara's arm, small and trusting. That trust was a burden Clara had once feared. Now it gave her strength. The following day, Clara decided to teach Lily small things tasks to keep them busy, to make the hours less heavy. They gathered broken branches for kindling, sorted usable scraps from the debris outside, and even turned tidying the cottage into a game. Lily giggled when Clara pretended the broom was a clumsy old man tripping across the floor. The sound of her laughter filled the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. It had been so long since Clara had heard laughter that wasn't trapped in memory, but it wasn't just Lily who changed. Clara felt herself shifting too. Each time the girl reached for her hand, Clara's chest tightened, but the ache was no longer only grief. It was something sharper, cleaner. A reminder that her heart, though scarred, still had room to love. At night, when Lily fell asleep curled against her side, Clara stared into the shadows of the cottage and whispered promises she was still too afraid to say aloud in the day. "I'll keep you safe. I'll protect you. I won't let the silence take you." And in those moments, Clara realized something she hadn't allowed herself to admit. She needed Lily just as much as Lily needed her. One evening, after a long day of foraging for anything edible near the edge of the fields, Lily tugged on Clara's sleeve. "You don't look scared anymore," she said matter-of-factly. Words startled Clara. She hadn't thought about the look she wore, the way fear must have shadowed her face in those first empty days. "Do I not?" she asked quietly. Lily shook her head, her eyes wide and solemn. "You look strong." The compliment lodged in Clara's chest like a seed taking root. She had never thought of herself as strong. Survivors rarely did. Yet when she looked into Lily's earnest gaze, she wanted to believe it was true. That night, As Lily slept, Clara sat awake by the window, staring at the horizon. The silence was still there, but it no longer seemed cruel. It was a waiting silence now, a pause before something new. For the first time since the storm, Clara wasn't afraid of what might come. She wasn't afraid of the roads blocked, the houses empty, the uncertainty that stretched beyond tomorrow. Because no matter what came next, she wasn't alone. She had Lily, and perhaps more importantly, Lily had her. The cottage no longer felt like a tomb. With Lily there, it became something closer to a home, though patched together with scarcity and resolve. Each day settled into a fragile routine, finding food, fetching water, keeping the fire alive when the nights grew cold. Yet beneath the rhythm of survival was something more, something that gave shape and meaning to their hours. Clara had never thought of herself as resourceful, but with Lily watching her every move, she discovered skills she hadn't known she carried. When the crackers were gone and the rice nearly finished, Clara ventured farther into the broken town, returning with half-crushed apples from an overturned crate and a jar of honey miraculously unbroken. She rationed them carefully, watching Lily's eyes widen at each sticky spoonful. "Sweet," Lily murmured, giggling when it dripped down her chin. Clara laughed too, wiping her clean with the hem of her sleeve. It had been years since laughter rose so easily to her lips. Water was more difficult. The rain barrel had run low, and the nearby stream was murky with runoff from the storm. Clara boiled what she could, teaching Lily how to collect condensation by stretching cloth over a pot. The girl's eagerness to help reminded Clara of her own childhood, when even small tasks felt important, a way of proving worth. "You're clever," Clara told her one evening as Lily proudly displayed a damp scrap of cloth dripping into a jar. Lily beamed. "Clever like Mama?" The question caught Clara off guard. Her chest tightened. She hesitated, then forced her voice steady. "Clever like you, Lily, that's more than enough." The days stretched, but they no longer dragged. Together they explored the edges of the ruined fields, gathering berries, searching abandoned sheds for anything useful. Clara carried a stick sharpened into a crude spear, not because she expected danger, but because Lily seemed calmer knowing Clara held it. At night, they told stories to pass the dark. Lily's were short, wandering tales about fairies hiding in the trees or cats that could talk. Clara's were memories disguised as fables, of a girl who once lived in a city where the lights never went out, of a woman who planted flowers on a windowsill high above the streets. Lily listened with wide-eyed wonder, never asking if they were true. One evening, as the fire sputtered low, Lily pressed her cheek against Clara's arm. "When people come back, will you still be my mama?" The question pierced deeper than Clara was ready for. She froze, her breath catching. She could have answered with hesitation, could have softened it with uncertainty. But the look in Lily's eyes, hope mingled with fear, demanded something stronger. "Yes," Clara whispered. Then louder, with a conviction that surprised even her. "Yes, Lily, I'll be your mama." The child's face lit with a joy so pure it nearly broke Clara's heart. She snuggled closer, murmuring, "Then I don't have to be scared anymore." Clara lay awake long after Lily slept, staring at the ceiling beams. The words she had spoken circled in her mind, heavy and sacred. They were more than comfort. They were a vow. And for once, she didn't feel the urge to take them back. The next morning, Clara noticed something had changed within her. She no longer carried herself like someone waiting to be rescued. She moved with purpose, her shoulders straighter, her steps firmer. She was still afraid of hunger, of the emptiness beyond the cottage, of what future awaited them, but fear no longer ruled her. Caring for Lily gave her something stronger than fear, responsibility, and with it, the courage to endure. One afternoon, while the sun dipped low, Clara caught sight of her reflection in a pane of cracked glass. She barely recognized herself. Her face was thinner, yes, her hair wild, her clothes torn, but her eyes were alive again. Lily skipped toward her with a handful of wildflowers, triumphant. "For you, Mama," she declared, thrusting them into Clara's hands. Clara bent, gathering the girl into her arms, flowers crushed between them. She laughed, and this time it wasn't just relief or release, it was joy, simple and whole. For the first time in years, Clara understood something she had long forgotten. Survival wasn't just about enduring. It was about having someone to survive for. The morning of the 12th day dawned with a strange brightness. The storm clouds that had loomed for so long finally broke apart, revealing a sky as blue as glass. Clara stepped outside the cottage with Lily's hand tucked firmly in her own, and for the first time since the storm began, the world looked alive again. Birdsong returned, tentative but sweet. The air carried a freshness that smelled of grass rather than rot. Even the ruined fields seemed softer in the sunlight, their scars no longer threatening but simply part of a story that was moving forward. Clara closed her eyes, breathing it in. Beside her, Lily mimicked the gesture, her small chest swelling as if she were inhaling hope itself. It was then they heard it, the sound Clara had almost given up on, voices, faint at first, carried on the wind but unmistakable. The voices of people. Clara's heart leapt. She tightened her grip on Lily's hand, both relief and fear flooding her at once. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Lily's eyes widened. People. They followed the sound cautiously, stepping over broken fences and mud-slick paths until they reached the main road. In the distance, figures moved, rescue workers in bright jackets. Townsfolk gathered together, the beginnings of order rising from chaos. Clara froze, a storm of emotions breaking inside her. For days she had prayed for this moment, yet now that it was here, she felt strangely unsteady. Would Lily be taken from her? Would someone else claim her, someone who had the right to, someone with more to give than Clara could? Lily sensed the hesitation. She looked up at Clara, her brow furrowed. Then, without a word, she let go of Clara's hand only to fling both arms around her waist, holding tight. "Don't let them take me," she whispered fiercely. "Be my mama." Still, Clara's throat closed. She dropped to her knees, pulling Lily close, her voice shaking with the force of her answer. "I am. I will. No one's taking you from me." The words came not as comfort but as truth, solid and unshakable. Clara realized she wasn't just promising Lily, she was promising herself. When the rescue workers finally spotted them and rushed forward, Clara rose, Lily still clinging to her side. Questions came quickly. Was she hurt? Was the child hers? Did they need food, water, shelter? Clara answered as best she could, her voice steady even when her heart pounded. "She's my daughter," she said firmly when asked about Lily. The words slid from her lips as naturally as breath. She expected to feel guilt at the lie, but no guilt came, only certainty. Lily squeezed her hand, her small face shining with trust, and Clara knew it wasn't a lie at all. Not anymore. They were led to a gathering point where survivors huddled together, wrapped in blankets and sipping from steaming cups of broth. Lily perched on Clara's lap, refusing to move, her head tucked beneath Clara's chin as though the crowd meant nothing. Clara held her close, the steady rhythm of the child's breathing calming her own racing pulse. As the hours passed and help continued to arrive, Clara found herself staring into the future she hadn't dared imagine. It wouldn't be easy. There would be questions, papers, authorities who might demand answers. But Clara no longer felt powerless in the face of what was to come. She had something stronger than fear now. She had Lily, and Lily had her. That night, as the two of them lay side by side under a borrowed blanket, Lily whispered sleepily, "We're safe now." "Mama!" Clara kissed her tangled hair, tears pricking her eyes. Yes, love. We're safe. The silence that settled over them was no longer empty, no longer cruel. It was peaceful, full of warmth and the promise of tomorrow. For Clara, it was the end of 3 days alone and the beginning of everything else.